sure that I am not a communist, and my name will never be connected with any communist. I have $30 million worth of business. What am I talking about communism for? Do you think the communist way of life is better than the American? No. Of course, if I did, I'd possibly go there and live. At the same time, I am not antagonistic. I have never been antagonistic until... If they were to invade America, I'd be the first to take up arms. Would you take up arms to repel? Yes, to repel any invader that came to the United States. Another thing. They don't like anybody that speaks frankly to the press. I haven't any decent public relationship in this country. I despise the press, and they have always lied about me.
My grandfather decided not to take the trip that he had planned in 1948. It was more trouble than it was worth. But he was growing tired of protesting his innocence, protesting his Americanness, his loyalty to one cause and his hostility to the other.
My only object is to preserve democracy as we have it. I think there are certain abuses to it, like everything else. I think there's been a great deal of witch burning. I don't think that is democratic. I know it seems very strange and rather bewilders me why I should be considered a communist. I have been here 35 years, and my primary interest is in my work. And it has never been anti-anything. It has never been maybe a critical comment, but it has always been for the good of the country. I don't like war, and I don't like revolution. I don't like anything overthrown. If the status quo of anything is all right, let it go. In my sense of being a liberal, I just want to see things function in harmony. I want to see everybody pretty well happy and satisfied.
You are listening to Hollywood Exiles from the BBC World Service and CBC podcasts. The Red Scare was not confined to Hollywood. The glamour and drama of the HUAC hearings captured the public imagination, but soon another figure came to dominate the anti-communist campaign in the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, why they sell out to communism in both East and West? My answer is and has been because of the stooges and dupes of the Kremlin who are doing our planning for us in the State Department.
In 1950, U.S. Senator Joe McCarthy charged onto Capitol Hill with a campaign to purge communists from every corner of public life. He claimed that the State Department had been infiltrated by communists, a claim that led to an official Senate investigation.
The time has come for a house cleaning. We cannot, ladies and gentlemen, fight world communism with planners who are either traitors or who are hip deep in their own failures.
His efforts were completely separate from the HUAC hearings, but they added to the general sense of anti-communist suspicion and paranoia. That political environment, including the HUAC hearings, is often lumped together under the same name, McCarthyism. It's hard to calculate how many people were affected. Hundreds of people were sent to prison, and some historians estimate between 10 and 12,000 lost their jobs. Teachers, lawyers, civil servants were all summoned to Washington, and a summons in itself was often enough for people to get fired. Dalton Trumbo had been proved right. He'd been convinced that in this atmosphere, after careers had been destroyed in Hollywood, the average American would be next in line. People from all walks of American life were having similar experiences to Trumbo and Lee's, and facing a kind of political exile. It had a devastating effect on the people involved, and on their families too. Larry Sapler has interviewed many family members of people accused by both HUAC and McCarthy.
The children, I think, really kind of were traumatized in a way. I mean, when I interviewed them, I found that they were somewhat reticent on the subject, not ready to really dig deep into what had gone on and what had happened to them. They would talk to you and they would sort of tell you, but it's like they were a little bit once removed from the experience. I think the experience really affected them. But they had issues, lots of issues.
his career vanished overnight.
Tanya Verifield, Robert Lee's granddaughter.
I spoke recently with his daughter, Kathy, and she reminded me of the mistreatment she had at school from classmates. They received calls all the time at the home from the FBI. She would answer the phone and it would be them calling with a scare tactic. When he was blacklisted, he sold their house and moved his family to Tucson, Arizona, and even there the FBI followed them. So my grandfather, who had gone from being a successful screenwriter in Hollywood, went to being a maitre d' at a hotel, and the FBI showed up and spoke to the owner of the hotel to let him know that he was employing a red and to sully my grandpa's reputation even there, and try to make him lose the very hard-earned living that he was trying to eke out to support his family.
After his Communist Party membership had been made public, Robert Lees appeared before the House Un-American Activities Committee. We know from the transcripts that the committee was eager for him to name names. They offered him a way to save himself. They wanted him to denounce his writing partner, Fred Ronaldo. "Do you know Ronaldo?" they asked. "Who?" Lees said. "Your partner." "I know my partner, yes." "And his name?" "I believe that is public information, sir. The one next to mine on the script." Robert Lees didn't name names. He understood what this would mean for himself and the people that he loved, but he wouldn't sacrifice his principles. That choice would cost him his career and the big house he'd earned in Los Angeles and pretty much life as he knew it. In his statement to the committee, he explained why. His granddaughter read parts of it out for me.
Statement of Robert Lees filed with the clerk for the record. I believe no man who has made writing his profession can completely disassociate himself from people. He writes about them, he writes for them. They are both his inspiration and his audience. Their political freedom guarantees the necessary tools of his trade, freedom of thought and expression. I believe I am here because in those 17 years that I have worked as a writer, I have functioned as a citizen. I firmly supported the election of Franklin Roosevelt. I joined with other writers and artists in actively campaigning for him. I am asked to purge my friends and my conscience under threat of having my 17 years of work and devotion to my craft end in blacklist. No writer who is a true American can ever force himself to betray his citizenship and his friends, or write the kind of material that will be forced upon the American people if this committee has its way.
Unlike Lees, my grandfather didn't have to testify. By 1952, he's making plans for a trip abroad to promote his new movie Limelight. And once again, federal agents are keeping a close eye on his comings and goings.
The FBI investigation of Chaplin is now, in this stage, geared toward trying to equip the INS with evidence that it can use to block Chaplin's reentry.
The departure date gives agents a firm deadline.
The FBI is also feverishly working in 1952 to build its case, and here's where it starts going all the way back to 1922. It basically tries to document everything that it's had in its investigation to this point.
They go back over everything, right back to the earliest files on Chaplin. All the accusations against him, the personal and the political. They wanted him out. And this time they would get their way.
Hoover, in cahoots with the Attorney General, decides on a plan to essentially revoke that reentry permit once Chaplin leaves, and then therefore make Chaplin return and appear before yet another INS questioning session. If they can get him to perjure himself in the context of that inquisition, they could then exclude him on those grounds.
They want Chaplin to perjure himself, to lie to them under oath. They know they have nothing on Chaplin's politics. He wasn't a member of any organization. He hadn't overtly given money to organizations expressly for the purposes of supporting communism. And any statements he'd made publicly could be countered with reasoned argument. But what they do have is his personal life.
Their hope is to go back to the Joan Barry stuff.
Nearly a decade had passed since my grandfather had been taken to court by Joan Barry following their relationship gone bad. One case in which he'd been accused of human trafficking, the other in which he'd been accused of fathering her child. Legally, he'd come out of these trials relatively unscathed, but public perception was another thing. But it wasn't these cases the FBI were interested in.
But this allegation that Chaplin had paid for a couple of her abortions prior to that.
Abortion being illegal in the United States at this point.
The implicit assumption here is that Chaplin will deny this in this hearing, and then if they can prove it, they will now have grounds to exclude him.
On the 17th of September, 1952, Charlie Chaplin and his family, including my mom Geraldine, boarded the Queen Elizabeth liner to Southampton. It was only 2 days later when the ship's radio picked up the news.
The story which makes the most sensational news is the departure of Charlie Chaplin for London. His homecoming to his native country after 21 years' absence will be quite a sentimental occasion for Britishers and for Chaplin. But the same can't be said of his departure from these shores. Immigration officials are prompt to suggest that he's coming by
Should Charlie Chaplin want to return to the United States, he would be subject to an INS interrogation. And that interrogation would determine, so it was announced, whether he is admissible under the laws of the United States. The Attorney General, James McGrannery, gave a press conference. He indicated that this action had been planned for some time, but that they wanted to wait until my grandfather was out of the country.
He's also been charged with making statements that would indicate a leering, sneering attitude toward a country whose gracious hospitality has enriched him. No harm can come from a fair hearing. And he can prove his worth. For admission and meeting the standards of the requirements under our law, he can be admitted. But he'll have to meet them.
My grandfather decided it wasn't worth the trouble. After more than 40 years in America, he didn't need to prove himself.
Chaplin has put his studios up for sale, but is not at the moment selling his Hollywood home. And indications are that he does not expect to appear as an actor on the screen again. Later in the program, I'll review what may be his swan song as an actor, the movie Limelight.
A few months later, my grandfather would issue a public statement.
I have been the object of lies and vicious propaganda by powerful reactionary groups who, by their influence, have created an unhealthy atmosphere in which liberal-minded individuals can be singled out and persecuted. Under these conditions, I find it virtually impossible to continue my motion picture work, and I have therefore given up my residence in the United States.
Charlie Chaplin, the man who had done so much to make Hollywood the center of the entertainment world, would never live in the United States again. But that would not be the end of the story. The fight back was gathering force, and Dalton Trumbo was leading the charge. Hollywood Exiles is presented by me, Una Chaplin. Our producers are Glyn Tansley and Megan Jones. For previous and longer episodes, go to the Hollywood Exiles podcast at bbcworldservice.com/Hollywood Exiles or search for the Hollywood Exiles podcast.